Hello. So this is a anti-aging protocol, or or at least a mentality. Um, this would be very similar to what you would find in most well-developed wellness systems. Uh, a lot of this stuff falls under the category of spirituality or religion. So it's in Buddhism, Qigong, Christianity, yoga, uh, like Central American, Toltec sort of spirituality. And I like spirituality is just a word to say that the activity that you're doing is reliant on patterns that the people around you can't understand or can't see. Right, so an anti-aging protocol is to make sure that you are enmeshed in and connected to the patterns of reality. So, like when you're born, you're very connected in with everything that's going on, and the body, like, because of that connection, flourishes and sort of erupts into the pattern of being a human. And then as you quit doing certain patterns, or as you break them, the body disconnects from reality. It disconnects from the patterns around it. It disconnects from the, think of the archetypical pattern of humanity, like the highest human form, your genetic potential. That's sort of what erupts in your ultimate youth, right? You come out and you're headed in that direction towards the potential of your humanity, and then as you age, that direction falls off. You're no longer going in the direction of your potential, and you'll actually go in the opposite direction, which is death. So when that's using patterns that people understand, it's generally called wellness or science or medicine. And if you get into and start working with patterns that the people around you can't see or can't understand, that gets you in the realm of what just seems like magic or spirituality or dogma, I guess, right? Like if somebody's working with a pattern that you can't see, and you start behaving that way, or believing that way, or thinking that way, even if you can't see the pattern, then it looks like you have beliefs, where another person could be doing the exact same thing you are, but completely devoid of beliefs because they can see what they're doing. Right? So like if you can't see God, if you can't see Christ, if you can't feel the energy, I don't know what to call it, like the ether, the water. If you can't feel your body, if you can't feel the momentum of your energy, then you're doing, I don't know, I don't think it's bad. Like it's even if you can't see a pattern, it's good to acknowledge the pattern. Like let's say that you can't see you've not been around long enough to know that river floods every May. And you've never seen it before, you don't know, and somebody goes, don't go in the river over there in May, and you're like, why? It's totally dry. And they're just don't do it, and you don't go in there, and it floods, and then you don't get hit. That's still appropriate behavior. So in terms of people following religions and stuff like that, even if they can't see it, a lot of the times you'll notice that it's helpful at very least. In some circumstances. So, like for the anti-aging protocol, right? You want to get reconnected to those patterns. And so a lot of the times, like when you get to be this age, it's the cessation of effort. Because before you were connected to everything, so your effort was like this joyful expression of everything. But if you get disconnected, your effort becomes a struggle, and it's almost like everything's moving this way and you're disconnected. So then all of a sudden you're fighting against everything, you're pushing against everything, you're trying, basically. So like when you're trying, you're pushing against something, you're fundamentally aging, or reinforcing aging. So to do an anti-aging protocol you have to slow down a little bit, right? And if you slow down too much, like you have to stop trying, right? You have to stop pushing against the surrounding everything, the surrounding field. We'll start with the immediate field because the field then plugs into everything. But if you're pushing, if you're going too fast, if you're going too hard, if you have too much will, too much volition, that only, even if it's the volition to pay attention, right? If somebody goes, focus on your thoughts or do non-thoughts, or just be aware. Even the fact of your awareness is a separation from all that is, and in the practices of awareness reinforce that separation. And but so does the practice of running too hard, running in the wrong, right? If you run in the wrong way, you get injuries. Like if you practice awareness in the wrong way, you get, right? Everything that you do is the result of death, so it either reinforces it or it causes it. And so that means that if everything's going at a certain rate, if you're trying to slow down too much, right? Like if you're trying to be still, as everything else around you moves, you're still resisting everything. And so it's the rate or the pace at which an anti-aging protocol happens is very dependent on what's going on around you. You have to sense that. You have to sense that. If you're in a class, if you're in a room, everything's going to be moving at a certain pace, and you're going to want to go at that pace. If you're by yourself, everything's going to be moving at a certain pace, and you're going to want to go at that pace. And so that if you start moving if you start doing anything in a rhythmic pattern, any sort of back and forth motion, any sort of circular motion. So imagine how how you can get water to go at a predictable pace where you can find it. So that's going to be back and forth, or that's going to be in a swirl. And so as you go back and forth or in a swirl, your fluidic mass, all of it, right? That's all of your electron activity, which you can get 90% of the way there with looking at the activity of water, 85% of the way there, and then the activity of water is going to be right next to, connected to, intermeshed with all of the electrical, all the electron, all the fluid parts of any element that you are is the electrical activity of it. All of it will start to slosh back and forth because it behaves just like water. It behaves like something dissolved in water or something floating in water. And so, because everything is ultimately floating in water, right? Everything that you can perceive with the five senses is something happening in your nervous system, put there by your sense organs, right? Optic nerve is where all of the sights come from, where all the objects come from. Touching the objects is like where your peripheral nervous system comes from. It's able to touch things. That's still generated and mediated in your nervous system because it's put into the body with neural impulses. The sense organs put neural impulses into the body at a certain frequency, and that frequency that they fire at is what gives rise to all perception, all objects. And so that neural activity is electrical activity in water. The cellular metabolism, and especially action potentials, which is the word for neural impulses, those are all phenomena that are happening in the body water. And so all of this, since it's a neural activity, is ultimately electrically dissolved in water, happening in water. So as you slosh back and forth, as you do anything back and forth, it's going to behave at very least as something floating or contained in water. And so at that point, like, what do you know? I know how the world's moving. It's going back and forth because I've been going back and forth for this long. I know that if I wanted to look at what everything is doing, because I've been going back and forth, I know that, okay, I need to be going back and forth, at very least, to be with or to align with the pattern of what's happening right now. And so I'm looking for areas where that's not happening, or I don't have the ability to access it, but it's still something in my awareness. So as you get older, it tends to like the core. If you've made any decisions in your life, if you've done anything that's at its core disconnected from reality. So sin, suffering, lying, right? Buddhists call that suffering. Christians call that sin. So when the Buddhists the world is inherently suffering, is the same thing as the Christian doctrine of like original sin. And so anywhere that you've done that is an area in the body that's no longer connected to the pattern of all that is, which is what we subjectively experience being connected to that pattern as being alive, being present, being spontaneous, being useful. And so there's a pattern where I stay attached to that, right? So it's this, and then once I've attached to it, I've basically become one with the water and the electrical activity of my body. And it's going back and forth, and I'm remaining and I'm being there with it, watching it go back and forth. And so then I pick an area that's aging, for instance, like my back, an area that's injured, an area that's not performing correctly, an area that's disconnected from the pattern, right? And you can have the water and have that part push into each other. I can make sure that as I move back and forth, I can make sure that it's submerged in the water, like my whole spine. And I can make sure that there's water pressure being applied to it, being applied to the whole thing. And the goal here is to get that water to saturate, to merge with the electrical activity of that part that's moving in a different direction, and get that part to move as one with everything around it. So to demystify that is you're just getting the stuff in your body to move with and be one with the water of the body. To get the body to be at least floated in, but better yet, at one with the awareness of the body. And so, if you do that too hard, you're going against the grain. If you don't do it at all, you're going against the grain. There's this sweet spot of where that's just happening, and you're doing it because it's happening. And then you want to explore areas to where that seems to start happening. So if you lose a range of motion, you just try and get down in that range of motion and keep your awareness flooded and penetrating that part. And so you should get an instantaneous, okay, that's correct form. And then if you do this over time, the part might resaturate as well. And it's essentially feeding it water. So you can imagine as you feed these parts of your consciousness, or feed them water, they rehydrate the same way as if you were very thirsty and somebody fed you water. like this practice of getting water to go into the body is as transformative as giving somebody dying of thirst water. And then that tends to, like, you could view it as slowing down the aging process, sort of, or at least accepting it. Right, because ultimately you're accepting the aging process. You're not going against it, and then that's what can precipitate a shift into the consciousness around the event rather than the event, which is dying. And so as you get it, I could start doing stuff more and more and more elaborate, which is cool. In some ways, that's going with the innate, like, I have these ideas in my head, this creativity of like, oh, I want to be doing flips, or I want to be doing cool movements. And so that can tend to, you can start to align with that, and the movement will get like more and more and more. And cool things might happen, but you know, you suddenly separated and you're pushing off all that is to perform the movement. So it's like that it's very easy to once you start to revitalize something, or you get into the state to where you can feel it revitalizing, it's very tempting to kind of jump out of or do something with that state. Especially if the people around you, like if they're not, and if you get the water too, like the idea is if you actually fully envelop and saturate and contain those ideas of higher performance, it brings them into existence as well. Because if you get that idea, which is like a frequency or a pattern, if you actually envelop that idea with your awareness, that pattern cohabitates the water, the consciousness of your body, with all the other electrical activity. So it shapes and turns all the activity of the body into that pattern. So with the trampoline, it's letting me feel out a ways. I can feel the whole trampoline. And then that's in my awareness. So it's like helping my awareness grab and inhabit and envelop all that space. And then when I hop off the trampoline, that part of me that was feeling into the trampoline, it still exists. It's just now it's on the ground. But because the awareness was there, it's actually, it's that far into the ground. So as I fall, my momentum leaves me. I feel it spread out into the trampoline, and then it. Whoop. So if I get off of the trampoline, it's still, that area that I went into because of the trampoline is still there. It's still open. It doesn't have the properties of the behavior of the trampoline, but the consciousness has expanded into that area regardless of it, right? So that's what's happening with different rituals, training methods, experiences, where you have some, pseudo artificially arranged situation or something outside of normal that you feel out into the world through that, and then that opens that sort of door. And it's paradoxical because, like, as you before entering into suffering or sin or whatever, you were all of that. So as any of these techniques that allow you to expand or go out and reclaim yourself can never equal the state of which of how it all started. So I'm just saying these things to point out like a pattern. Lots of different people have said this in lots of different ways. I personally think water is the most universal way of looking at how fluid is responding. Like water behaves what is like it. And it's the right.